college, great supporters of me. I really appreciate all of you. And we're fortunate today to have as our speaker another staunch supporter of the college and of the University of Louisville. David Jones is a 1954 graduate of the College of Business. Been instrumental in funding the international experiences for our students and faculty here. While a senior here at U of L, he won the Outstanding Senior Award, and he also earned his CPA. He completed a law degree at Yale University in 1960 and served on Yale's economics faculty from 1958 to 1960. That's a great major, by the way. And, if you want to study economics as a U of L student, you can do it as a BA, you can do the arts and sciences requirements, or you can do a BS and do business requirements, and get the economics course. Encourage you to do that. That's what we'll add today. But Mr. Jones founded Humana in 1961, served as chief officer for 37 years. He's on the board. He was the board chair for 44 years prior to retiring in 2005. He was founding board chairman of Hospira until his retirement in 2007. He also is the retired director of Abbott Laboratories and several other companies. And with this experience, Mr. Jones today is going to talk to us about leadership. And so it's my pleasure to introduce David Jones.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Everybody? Okay, it's nice to be back. I'm back here pretty often, actually. Some of you might have been in Al Gustafson's insurance class a few weeks ago. I come out here once every year and help teach that class for him. He told me it was the 25th year that I had done that. He's been doing it for 57 years. When I was out here in the College of Business, I see this beautiful auditorium, and I remember what we had in the early 1950s. I don't know if anybody out there remembers Old Menzies Hall. Is there anybody here who's old enough to remember that? It was a leftover building from the Navy V-12 program in the Second World War, but it was a place that had fabulous professors. Carl Abner, Bill Thompson, Dean Kraft. I still remember the teaching and the wonderful experience that I had here. I was able to, did take the CPA exam that same year, and luckily passed it thanks to the good education that I received here at the College of Business, it's called today. So I've been asked to talk to you all about leadership, and I've distilled my experiences over a very long period of time, and my plan is to go through about 10 points that I think are absolutely critical for inspirational leaders, and then I'm going to ask you all to ask me questions about anything about which you think I might know something. If I do, I'll tell you. If I don't, I'll tell you that I don't. The first thing a leader has to be is honest. Integrity is the most important character trait there is. Honesty means praising only those people who deserve praise. It means discharging those who deserve to be discharged. It means acting with total honesty in everything that you do. A leader must be optimistic. It's absolutely critical as a leader that you believe that you're going to reach your goal. If you don't believe it, nobody else is going to believe it. A leader must have clear and sufficient authority to accomplish assigned tasks. If anybody ever asks you to do something but doesn't give you the authority that you need to do that, just say no. There's no way you can succeed without that. We have the problem here in the Jefferson County school system that our superintendent lacks the authority to hire and fire principals. There's no way in the world she can succeed until she gains that authority. And believe me, I'm working hard on changing that. I talked to 24 legislators in the 2014 session. Was unsuccessful. Not the first time in my life that I've been unsuccessful. None of you would remember the year of 1974 when we had a recession that was worse than the recession of 2008 and 9. In that year, I had a wonderful opportunity for the company, and I called on 40 separate banks around the country, got turned down by every single one. It was still a great idea. In 1978, we accomplished the task at a much higher, but still affordable costs. So there's nothing wrong with trying and not succeeding. If there's ever a problem, it's that you give up. If you're going to be a leader, you have to find a way, if your course is an honorable one, to get there. So a leader must have great strength of will. So often, especially in our public world today, our legislators know at the local, state, federal level that it's not fair to kick the can down the road and to leave to you and your children and your grandchildren these incredible unfunded liabilities for promises made without taxes being levied to carry out the promises. What's lacking is will. A leader has to have a strong sense of will. A leader must create a laser-like focus on the goal that's to be accomplished. Clarity of thought and clarity of goal is absolutely required. You wander around forever if you don't know exactly where you're headed. I tell people, and I'm going to tell you, if you can't write your idea on the back of my calling card, you don't have a clear idea. It's absolutely critical that you have a clear goal on which to focus. If you do that, the next issue is you must communicate that goal clearly to every member of your team, over and over again if need be, with clarity, with brevity. And the reason for that is so that every member of the team can pitch in and tell you what they think about your idea. Two-way communication is absolutely vital. Top down, do it this way, it doesn't work. You have to share your ideas with your team. If you do that, they will almost always refine your idea. It will be a better idea as a result of that communication. And if you've established real trust, sometimes they'll tell you something that's really important, and that is that it's a dumb idea. And leaders need to hear that. Just because I think of something, it doesn't mean it's a good idea. We're all capable of self-delusion. We don't intentionally come up with bad ideas, but we do come up with bad ideas. So that communication is absolutely critical. And we had that at Humana. We had a system in which people could discuss. We had a rule that if anyone thought they had a better idea than the way we were doing things, that every Tuesday morning we had a management committee and they were able to submit their idea to us. If it was a better idea, that's how we improved. Okay, a leader must, after that two-way communication and the goal has been reached or milestones have been reached, this is another point that's absolutely critical, and that is you must offer earned recognition. When somebody's done a good job, say thank you. It's that simple. You can write a note. That's what I usually do. It's really important for everyone on the team to know when they've done something that's been helpful to the cause. So that's what a leader must do. Something else that's, all of these things I think are important, one not necessarily more important than another, but it's absolutely vital that any element whatsoever that's critical to reaching the goal must be measured. If it's important, you absolutely must measure it, especially results. What do you think? Everybody knows that? Everybody doesn't know that. First of all, it takes intellectual effort to figure out what's critical. When you do that, when you have a clear goal and you figure out what's critical and you measure it, it keeps you from wasting scarce resources on things that don't help you reach the goal. At Humana, we used to be called the black box company because we measured everything. We didn't measure everything. All we measured were things that were critical. If it's critical, you have to measure it. And I don't know how many reports I read that tell about all of the inputs. Inputs obviously are important. Good intentions are important. But at the end of the day, it's performance. And it has to be measured. This is something that, the next one is something that I learned from Peter Drucker. I was lucky enough to meet Peter in 1974. How many of you know who Peter Drucker is? Not so many anymore. There are over 6,000 Drucker institutes in China today. The Chinese know who Peter Drucker was, the greatest management guru who ever lived. Never had an employee in his life. If you wanted to come see him, he always said, bring a check. I don't send bills. All of his notes that I have from him are handwritten. But Peter Drucker was incredibly important to Wendell, Cherry, and me, my partner with whom we started Humana, and worked together as partners, almost as brothers, for 30 years until his untimely death at age 55 from smoking. It'll take 15 or 20 years off your life. That's not a moral judgment, it's just common sense. Anyway, the thing that I learned from Peter Drucker was that throughout the life of an enterprise, a leader must create the conditions that allow all his colleagues or her colleagues to do their best work. Sounds simple, it's not. It's not something that you can do in a 5-year plan. It's something that you have to believe in and work on your entire life. Don't create obstacles for your team. Create the conditions that allow them to do their best work. As we built our hospital business, we'll give an example here in Louisville. We started with a 0 market share. It wasn't long before we had a 40% market share. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because we talked to those being served, the doctors, and the question we asked always was, what would cause you to use this hospital? And they would tell us the things that they needed. They needed staffing, they needed equipment, they needed all these things to come together at the right time so that what they did, they could do safely and effectively. And we listened and we created those conditions, and before you knew it, we had a 40% market share. Another thing that helped us along the way in that was talking to another customer set, that is the people who were patients in the hospital. And you know what they told us? They said what they wanted from a hospital was an effective emergency room, that was the most important thing for them. So we looked around at that and did a little research, and I remembered from my time in the Navy, and the military always has something called a triage system. That is, you look at the most seriously wounded person first, and we said, how can we do that? And we said, instead of having a person coming into the emergency room talk to a clerk about how they're going to pay, what their insurance is, let's set a triage nurse out there to meet them when they come in and say, why are you here? What medicines are you taking? That's all you need to know in order to initiate treatment. So we set a 60-second standard for the Humana hospital hospitals. Within 60 seconds of arrival, you'll be met by a triage nurse who finds out why you're there. At least you're not going to die while they're sorting out your insurance. Overnight, almost, our emergency rooms began to draw in much of the business because people were really intrigued by the idea that you could receive that kind of treatment, and because half the admissions of a hospital come through the emergency room, all of a sudden our census was going up while everybody else's census was going down. It's a fixed cost business. Adding an additional patient costs very little. Losing a patient costs a lot. You lose the entire revenue, but your costs don't go down. So here in Louisville, as an example, we had a high market share, and we had a 12% pre-tax profit structure. After taxes, that was only about 7%, but our competitors had about a 3% pre-tax. Actually, they didn't pay taxes on their profits, but the reason we built that kind of a market share here was because of customer satisfaction. So it's really important that you create the conditions that allow any of your colleagues to do their best work, and that's what we did for the doctors. A leader must make decisions quickly. Once facts are known, few things will kill morale and momentum like bureaucratic lassitude. It's not easier to make a decision by waiting. I mentioned our Tuesday morning management committee. There were 5 of us on that committee. If I was out of town, Wendell was in charge. If we were both gone, Carl Pollard was in charge. If all 3 of us were gone, Bill Ballard was in charge. And if all 4 of us were gone, Tom Flynn was in charge. But whoever was there made any decision that was ripe for decision making. We promised everyone in our company that if you have something that needs our decision, you get it to us by Monday night and we'll decide it on Tuesday. Decisions aren't better because any one person makes them. If everybody on the team knows what's going on, the decisions are just as good. And believe me, that makes a huge difference in how an enterprise operates. A leader must require that today's work be completed today. We just don't tolerate procrastination. What happens if you wait till tomorrow is you don't remember exactly what the problem was. It's absolutely critical. I try every day to clear all my emails and everything that needs to be answered. I don't always finish. If I go home at night, then I get on my computer and finish it. Then once in a while they carry over for some reason. But I try to do today's work today, and that's something that I think every leader must do. My last point is not actually a leadership point, but it's still critically important, and that is a leader must know and believe and teach that profit is not a dirty word, it's not a vision, it's not an end. Profit is an absolute requirement. Any enterprise, no matter how noble, that fails to meet all of its costs, including the cost of capital, will expire. That beautiful mission dies. Not only the mission dies, the pensions die, the jobs die. So whatever sector you're involved in, be absolutely sure that you are profitable. First of all, if there is a moral issue about tax-paying enterprises and non-tax-paying enterprises, the morality is all with the taxpayer. I'm not denigrating the voluntary sector, which is a very important sector in our world, but there's no moral superiority. You cannot claim the moral high ground by assertion, only by performance. The only way you can prove performance is by measurement, and I've gone through my list. I'm ready for questions. Who's first?
David, I remember when I came to town in 2005, I met with you the first time and talked to you a bit about our focus here at the school on entrepreneurship. And I remember what you said to me. You said that entrepreneurship isn't just about building.
School louder.
Entrepreneurship isn't just about building new companies, although you did build a new company, but that every big company has to be every bit as entrepreneurial as they go along through their life as they were when they started. So could you just talk a little bit, I mean, Humana, I don't know how many times you would count Humana was recreated, but certainly 3 or 4 or 5 times. How do you change an organization?
I'm not sure you actually change the organization, but the question is, how do you, as a company grows and gets big, how do you keep an entrepreneurial spirit? How do you create change, if you will? And a lot of them don't. They get, just like old people, their arteries get hard and they're a little fossilized in their thinking and their actions. At Humana, I have to tell you a little bit about failure as well as success. Humana today is like a $50 billion business. The hospital business that I spun off to shareholders in 1993 is a bigger business than that. And the thing I want you to remember about that is we built 2 of the largest companies in America right here in Louisville, Kentucky, with graduates of the University of Louisville, of the University of Kentucky, of Bellarmine University. Wendell Cherry was from Horse Cave, Kentucky. I grew up down at, in a house that's now part of the Brown-Forman parking lot in the west end of Louisville. Carl Pollard was from Lancaster, Kentucky. We built these wonderful businesses with people just like all of you. Anything that can be done any place in the world can be done right here, because life is about people, not about place. Wherever you are, if you have an idea, if you have the energy, if you have the ability, you can start a business. Obviously, not all of them go to be as big as Humana did, but we grew that big by thinking. The one thing that I will take some credit for is that every day, if Wendell and I were both in town, we would sit down together and close the door, and you know what we asked? We said, what's going on in the world, and how does it impact what we're doing? That was totally intentional, that we thought. Wendell was a bright guy. We both were thinkers. So we're in the nursing home business. We built a nursing home in 1961 out on Bardstown Road. In 1968, we had 8 nursing homes, and a stockbroker in town, Pat Conway, came to me and said, would you like to go public? I thought, who wants this little company? We went up to New York City, met a guy named Tubby Burnham at Burnham and Company, and it turned out that Medicare had come in 1966, and all the smart people in Wall Street thought it was going to be a bonanza for nursing home companies. As it turned out, 83 companies in a 2-year period came public. And overnight, every need in the nation for our new nursing home was filled. So here we are, we'd gone public, we had capital for the first time. We'd grown from 8 nursing homes to 50 nursing homes in a 2-year period, and had another 10 under construction, and there wasn't any place else to build another new nursing home. So we said, well, what do we know how to do? Now we have capital. What are we good at? We're good at borrowing money, we're good at the real estate side of it. We're good at getting zoning for things that people don't want in their neighborhoods. So what's like that? Guess what we came up with? Trailer parks. Nobody wants a trailer park in the neighborhood. But we were pretty good at that. Before you know it, we had a dozen big trailer parks, and we discovered that the only way you fill a trailer park is to set up a sales lot and sell the trailers. So now we're in the consumer durable business, about which we know absolutely nothing. The short story, after a couple of years of that, we realized what a mess we were in, and we shut it down. Probably the smartest decision we ever made. Okay? So that was one change that a lot of people don't know about, but it's important to know that, because what we learned about that is that you shouldn't take on things that are really different from what you're doing. If you've got something that's pretty successful, think of something that's more like that. So we thought, what else is like that? Well, hospitals are a lot like nursing homes. There's a lot more velocity, a lot more complexity, but a good manager can manage a whole lot more revenue in a hospital than in a nursing home. And we had a pretty good training program. We were promoting nurses. It turned out nurses were it's a tough profession. They knew how to work all night long. They knew how to work on Christmas Day and New Year's Eve. They knew how to hire and fire people, and all we had to do was teach them a little bit about finance, about budgeting, and they made tremendous leaders. So we said, why don't we try hospitals? But that came from the fact that we saw the similarities. The hotel services were the same in both enterprises. The nursing homes did a lot of therapy, physical therapy particularly, and that transition turned out to be a pretty successful one. Along the way, something called the Health Maintenance Organization came into being. We already had Kaiser and 1 or 2 other large HMOs, and that was changing the rules for hospitals. We had a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, that had the contract with a large HMO, and that filled the hospital up. Then we lost the contract to a lower bidder, and all of a sudden the census dropped and the profitability left. And I said, maybe we ought to take a look at that business as a defensive measure. So we did that. We started put our toe into the insurance market. And in 1986, our 3rd year in the insurance market, we sold 600,000 lives, which was tremendous. We lost $150 million. We found that if you price a good product too low, you'll sell a lot of it. In that same year, we learned another lesson, which was instructive. We had built a beautiful hospital in 1981 in Mexico City. In 1986, they had a huge earthquake. Only one hospital in the city of 20 million people survived uninjured. We had built to California earthquake standards. The Humana Hospital is standing. You know what happened also during those 5 years? The peso went from 15 to 1 to 1,500 to 1. Wiped out 99% of our value. So we learned about sovereign risk, we learned about currency risk. If I'd had the pleasure of knowing these wonderful bankers, I probably could have avoided that. But everything we know that I know today came about as a result of something. We didn't know anything about the nursing home business, we didn't know anything about the hospital business, we didn't know anything about the park business, but our son Dan has built the most wonderful park system that's going on any place in the country. If you haven't been out to the parklands, I hope you'll go and have a look, because that's happening. How do we move Why did we leave the hospital business when it was so successful? The reason was that after we built about a 20% market share in a city, the Blue Cross executives would wake up and whisper in my ear, "We've been financing your assault on our business, and we don't like that." And in the other ear, the doctors were whispering, "You can hold us accountable for the 20% market share that you have in the insurance business, but if you're not careful, we can move our business that you don't control someplace else." I said, "This is silly. I'm just going to split the company into two pieces." That's why I spun off the hospitals. At that time, the hospitals, Ed Miller in the audience will remember this, the hospitals, we had $6 billion of revenue. The hospitals had $5 billion. The insurance had $1 billion. The hospitals earned 99% of the profit. I stayed with the insurance business because I thought it had a better future than the hospitals, and it's turned out, I think the hospitals are doing okay. Carl Pollard left as chief executive officer of a company called Galen, and the only regret that I have about that spinoff is that we split the Humana Foundation in half because Carl agreed to take on half the obligations. 6 months later, he merged the company with Columbia. Columbia, that year before the end of the year, left for Nashville, Tennessee, and half the Humana Foundation has been doing good works in Nashville for the last however many years. But Carl got a fabulous price for the company, and I sold all this Galen Columbia stock and reinvested it in Humana stock, which was like $6 a share. Today it's $170, whatever. The Humana stock, if you had bought stock at $8 on the internet, on the initial public offering, if your grandparents had bought stock for you at $8 a share today is over $20,000. It's had about a 19% compound rate of growth for 48 years. And it's all because of people. Everything in life is about people. If you build a team and you have a clear focus and everybody gets on board with it and you create the conditions that allow them to do their best work and you say thanks for the good works, good things happen. There's luck in it, there's serendipity, but those changes all had, I encourage you to spend a little time every single day if you can asking, what's going on in my life? Am I doing what I want to do or is somebody pulling my chain? Thinking is critically important to getting where you want to be. Dean Moyer, I hope I've answered your question. Who's next? Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask a question about the Humana Aetna buyout and how you might think it would affect Louisville.
The question is about the Aetna Humana transaction. I retired in 2005, and what I did, I said to Mike McAllister, if you want to talk to me, call me, because I'm not going to call you. We have a son who's a colonel in the Marine Corps, and I go to change of command ceremonies, and what they do is salute. 1 minute I'm in charge, the next minute you're in charge. I never second guess anything. I had nothing to do with the transaction. As I say, I've been retired for 10 years. I hope it turns out to be a good thing. It's not going to be a good thing for everybody. I've been on the other side of the transaction. They don't need two of everything that Humana is doing. Most of the jobs are going to be secure because Humana has a totally different set of businesses than Aetna does. The thing that I want to do is talk Mr. Mark Bertolini, the CEO of Aetna, into moving to Louisville. Connecticut's a miserable place to run a business. Now, Kentucky's not that much better right now, but it can be. It can be. I used to be a speechwriter for the Democratic Party for total transparency, but today we need to change the leadership in Frankfurt. It's happened at the governor level. If the House were to flip, and I think it will the next time around, then Kentucky could do the things like right to work, school choice, tort reform, the things that would make Kentucky competitive with Indiana and Tennessee, two of the best led states in the world, in the country, and we're sitting right here sandwiched in between them with absolutely mediocre leadership by wonderful people. It's not that the politicians are bad people or have bad intentions, but their decisions have been terrible for Kentucky. Now, 2 days before I met with Mr. Bertolini. He was kind enough to call me and ask to come and see me. The Hartford Courant, that's where they live in Hartford, had a headline that said, "Another reason not to die in Connecticut." Now, why did it say that? Because the legislature there, in its wisdom, had removed the lid on probate costs. Probate is when someone dies, you go before a probate judge and say, "I was a witness, the decedent appeared to be of sound mind." In Connecticut, they charge half of 1%, but it was limited to $12,500. Well, Connecticut is full of hedge fund billionaires who moved there to get away from New York taxation. So if one of them died, they made it retroactive to the first of the year. That tax went up from $12,500 to $5 million. Well, and that's on top of a whole lot of other things. Mr. Bertolini is not in a position to talk about moving today. If he were to give a hint that he was thinking about that, the senators from Connecticut would kill the deal. They could do that. So I won't have a chance to talk to him until after the deal closes. But I do think that if we get those changes that I talked about, Kentucky, see, the single biggest problem in Kentucky and in a lot of other places is the fact that our schools are not teaching every child to read comprehensively and write coherently and understand basic math. Our son is the chairman of the school board here right now. Our private foundation has put all of its efforts on figuring out what works in public education. And we're far from getting there, but I tell you, we have some great models here. Our Catholic school system, I have a grandson who just graduated last year from St. X. They have like 38 administrators, and they have about a fourth as many students as the public schools. And the public school system, when Dave went on the board, had 16,000 employees, but only 6,000 were teachers. A lot of others do things like drive buses and prepare foods, and they're necessary. But if the public school system were to do what I talked to you all about and focused on what's its mission, and if they agreed with me that the mission is to teach kids to read comprehensively and write coherently and understand basic math, then they wouldn't spend a penny on anything that didn't advance that mission. That's what focus is about, figuring out what needs to be done to get where you're going and concentrate your resources. Resources are always scarce. They're always finite. I don't want to take away the thunder from your economics professors, but economics is really simple. It's three things. Resources are finite. They have multiple uses about which people disagree. Almost everything that comes up deals with that. That is a little more complex than that. But what's the next question? Yes, sir.
First, I would like to thank you for coming out tonight.
A little louder, with.
First, I would like to thank you for coming out tonight. and
You're
speaking
welcome.
to us. I was curious to know what were some of the failures that you learned the most from.
I'm sorry. Come down here where I can hear you.
Would you like me to come down there?
Well, just shout it out.
I was curious to know what were some of your failures that you learned the most from.
What did I learn the most from my failures?
Yeah.
Don't do them again. There are different kinds of failures. I haven't told you about all of them. Anyone who does anything of any substance is going to have days that don't work out. That's why you have to be optimistic. I know that every day is not going to be a good day because I've had a long life and I've had all these experiences, but I still get up every day expecting it to be a good day, and almost all the days are good. Anytime you have a failure, what you have to do, well, let me tell you what we did at Humana. We had something we called the Quality College, and the Quality College was made up of a physician and a nurse. I think this was David Rollo's idea. And what the Quality College did, anytime we had an untoward event in a hospital, and we had over 100 hospitals, including several in Europe and one in Mexico, as I mentioned, if there was an unexplained death or any kind of an unexplained accident, we sent the Quality College out, these two people to go out there to find out what happened. Now, why do we do that? There are several reasons. The most important one is to keep it from happening again. So you have to have the facts in order to know what to do. Next, it also helps if you get the facts before a lawyer gets them, because sometimes the facts morph a little bit. I was once a lawyer. I think the important thing about that is that it keeps you from becoming complacent. It's really important to retain humility. None of us know everything. It's not a crime or a sin to make a mistake, but it's really important that you try to learn from that, to actually find out what happened, why it happened, and then you can take action to keep that from happening. If you go out to the parklands, I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a lady who passed away named Mrs. Helmsley. She was known as the Queen of Mean. Any of you all remember her? Oh, some of us do. She died with an estate of about $5 or $6 billion, and she left $12 million to her dog. No descendants, nobody else. So the money's all in an endowment, a foundation. One of the 4 trustees is a graduate of the University of Louisville. His name is John Cody. He's been working down here with the Brown Cancer Center. David Wood, who's on the board of the parks, is on the Brown Cancer Center board. He met Mr. Cody. He said, she died, the dog died. How about giving us the $12 million to build dog parks? And he said, no, not interested. When David said, well, let us give you a tour. So Sundance and I gave him a tour. First thing he did was use the restroom. He came out, he said, this is the cleanest restroom I've ever been in. So he was off to a good start. At the end of the tour, he said, Dan, we work in, I think, 23 countries. It's now a $9 billion endowment. And they are interested in 2 things. One is new medicines that have impact, and the other one is the environment. He said, this is the best project I've ever seen. Send me a request for $3 million. He sent down a staff person to write the request, and sure enough, they granted the request, and some interesting things are happening as a result of that. He said, this is just the beginning. That's the only environmental grant they've made in the United States. That's how special the parklands are, but you have to see it to believe it. And the 4th park won't open until April the 15th. At that point, you'll be able to hop on your bicycle either at Bardstown Road or Shelbyville Road and ride 19 miles without encountering traffic except on a couple of very small lanes. You'll be able to ride under Taylorsville Road, which you actually can already today. That's happening right here in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's not that different from Humana. We didn't know the first thing about parks or building parks, but what you learn from all of this is if you don't know how to do something, hire somebody who does. It's that simple. How do we learn that? When we opened our first nursing home on August 10th, 1962, the night before, the nurse that we'd hired to run it, who was more honest with herself than we were, stressed out and became our first patient. She didn't know the first thing about running a business. But we had projected onto her our wishes that she would do that. So for 2 months, we had utter chaos. We were both working. We each had 3 kids. We were both working long hours in the Wyatt Law Firm, and we were both teaching classes at night right out here. For 6 years, I taught 2 classes 3 times a year out here, back when I was poor. And I loved it. I met more interesting people, just people like you. I think people like me. So here we go. We've got this nursing home, and nobody to run it. Then I remembered that a guy I'd worked with in an accounting firm while I was at U of L had left accounting and gone into hospital administration. He was assistant at one of the great Catholic hospitals here, Elmer Schaffner. I called him and said, Elmer, how would you like to run this business? He said, sure. He came over, and overnight chaos turned to calm. That was so lucky that we learned that so early in our career, that wake up, if you don't know how to do something, you can get into a giant mess. But hopefully we've learned from all these different things. Next question. Yes, sir. Real loud if you don't mind.
The nonprofit sector. And
Say again?
You mentioned the voluntary sector, the nonprofit sector. I didn't know if you had some favorite nonprofits or some that stood out to you.
I don't think sponsorship has any meaning at all, other than bringing good intentions. Almost everybody has good intentions. They're always required, but they're never enough. I'm involved with all sorts of nonprofits. We have our family foundation that I told you about. I'm also a trustee of the Humana Foundation. We ran a program for 16 years over in Romania, Humana did, where we trained hundreds of Romanian physicians, starting in 1990, right after the Berlin Wall came down. I've been involved in almost every significant voluntary undertaking in this community, because everybody knows that if you're looking for money, you have to find money where it is. So I have nothing but respect for that. But if you happen to be in a voluntary organization that's profitable, I don't think it's right not to pay taxes. If you're making profit, you're not a nonprofit. So there's no magic in saying that I'm a nonprofit organization. At the end of the day, it's about performance. My opinion. My opinion is not necessarily right. We have three major sectors in our country. They're all important. We have the government, where they spend your money. You have the voluntary sector, where they're beneficiaries of money from people who have generously supported. And then you have the private sector, or the tax-paying sector, which picks up the bills for most of what happens in our economy. And I think you ought to know that it's incredibly important to create businesses that employ people and pay taxes, because they collect taxes both from the business if it's successful and from the workers who work there. The workers in the voluntary sector obviously pay taxes as well. And I think the only sector of the non-tax paying world that is actually profitable is the healthcare sector. And much of that comes from Medicare and Medicaid. We have a system that when the history is written 50 or 100 years from now, people will say it's impossible. No one ever came up with the idea of creating a system where the provider gets to decide how much to sell. Let me change Medicare to car care. I go out to Sam Swope. Well, Sam has passed away, but he still has good people there. And I say, I want to buy a hybrid car. I actually have a hybrid Honda Accord. That's 42 to 44 miles to a gallon. So I say, I want to buy the greenest car you've got on the lot, best gas mileage, et cetera. And they say, but Mr. Jones, we have a new program in America called Car Care. It's just like Medicare. And you're a good-part guy in Louisville. You don't have to drive a car like that. We've got a Bentley here for you. It's $300,000, but these people are going to pay for it. It's free to you. That's Medicare. Somebody writing the history of this era won't believe that there ever was a program in which the provider gets to decide how much and what to charge. Now, they can't always say what to charge any longer. For a long time they could, but that's been modified. But if my income's not sufficient, then I tell Mr. Jones, don't come back in 6 months, come back in 4 months, or as long as you're here. You want to hear a real story? I go to a heart doctor every year, and one year he said, I want you to get a carotid artery thing. So I show up and I go, and they do it. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes. They put a little grease on you and a light thing. And the cost was $460, and I had $430, and I had to pay 20% of it, or 80-some dollars. So in the afternoon, I go up to see my cardiologist, who reads the result. There was a brochure on his desk, and I picked it up and said, you can get the carotid artery, your stomach, and your ankle all done for $75, or $30 for one. And I just paid my 20% copay of 80-some dollars for one of those three things. So the next time, I kept that brochure, and the next time I was asked to do it, I took that in and said, I want to do it this way. $464 if you do it through Medicare, but if you do it as a private citizen, it's only $20 or $30. Well, that's you all heard about the Air Force paying $500 for a toilet seat or something like that. You can't believe that a program like that exists, that the provider gets to say how much of it I want to sell, and often how much I want to charge for it. It's rather bizarre. And it's, essentially bankrupting the nation. You can only spend money one time. Economics, with pardon to all the economists present, economics boils down to this. Resources are finite. They have different uses about which people disagree. And we need a whole new system. If any of you are truly interested, just send me an email or a note or something like that, and I'll send you my health plan, which if we were to elect, and I'm very dubious about who might get elected actually, but there has to be a reformation of the government programs. The market will work, but the market's not given a chance to work. I'm on a soapbox now, and I'll climb off of it. Any others? Yes, sure.
What 3 initiatives would you say should be the priority for the new governor to make Kentucky competitive?
Well, interestingly, I'm having lunch with him tomorrow.
To practice?
Yeah, so we can talk about that. I had a really busy day today, but the last thing I did before I left was to write myself a note about the things that I would talk to him about. And they are these. Let me get this straight.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you for a wonderful speech. Beautiful and very important things that you said. So thank you very much. You got this small gift.
Thank you.